Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The FAR overhaul continues to reshape federal procurement. From streamlining administrative procedures to clarifying socioeconomic program requirements and modernizing construction contracting, the latest revisions aim to simplify compliance and empower contracting officers. We explore what's new, what's gone, and what it means for buyers and vendors alike with former GSA Administrator and Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting, Emily Murphy. Emily, it's great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be back with you, Terry.
Well, we continue to talk about iterations on the FAR overhaul, and there was a big chunk that came out on August 14th. Tell me, what's your general sense of that package?
So I think it was actually the most groundbreaking of the packages we've seen so far. It did a lot in terms of simplification, commercialization, and really just some incredible shifts in how procurements are going to operate going forward. I was really excited to read it and see. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how it ends up being implemented.
Well, simplification and commercialization have been very common themes so far in this administration. So let's start. What part of it do you think was most important or transformative?
Oh, so it's a tie between 8 and 12. Both of them did some pretty impressive things. 8, we'd already gotten a little bit of a hint from Russ Vought's memo, M2531, that we were going to see a prioritization of government-wide best-in-class contracts. And we saw that come in place. So we still have priorities for Ability 1 for federal prison industries. But now contracting officers are told that they have to look first at BIC contracts as a source of supply. And that's going to be a real game changer for everyone, because if you're a company that has been doing business independently with an agency or on an agency's own multiple award contract, but your competitor has a seat on a GWAC or on a GSA schedule that's considered a BIC, you're now at a competitive disadvantage, because it's not just that, is that company on both, and therefore you have to go with the BIC. Is the solution or the product, the service on a BIC, you have to go with that BIC.
So what is that going to mean for contracting officers as they're trying to source their procurements?
So contracting officers are told that they have to do a DNF, a determination of findings, if they choose to go with something other than a BIC. And it needs to go up to the HCA, the head of contracting activity, or the senior procurement executive to be signed off on. So it is a big deal. It means that they're going to be doing a lot of market research to see what's on those BICs. This is going to create a challenge also, though. How does GSA and OMB make it really explicitly clear what solutions are out there? How do we make it easier to find those? And so that's going to be one of the challenges involved in this.
It seems like there's got to be kind of a new oversight mechanism to make sure that contracting officers are actually doing this. Do you see a change in those kinds of rules coming?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we saw an RFI come out from GSA last week for a procurement ecosystem that was supposed to accommodate up to 250,000 users, cover everything that GSA on the federal acquisition side of the world does. So everything from the contract vehicles it has, the schedules, the GWACs, the travel contracts, fleet, everything, sort of a cradle to grave approach. And I suspect that part of the reason that they're looking at that is to make sure that contracting officers, whether they're at GSA or someplace else, are getting all that information.
So it could be kind of a one-stop shop for all of the approved sources.
That's what GSA seems to be suggesting.
That would be quite a change.
It's a very ambitious RFI. It's a draft RFI, I should say. It's not even an RFI, but it's a draft RFI and request for white papers. It's a pretty ambitious undertaking, though. So one more thing on Part 8 that's really exciting. For the first time ever, the FAR mentions shared services. And it tells us that we're going to have to look at that contracting officers should look at shared services before making an award. And actually, I said one more thing, but let me give you 2 more things, because the other really exciting thing is they took all of the ordering procedures for schedules that have previously been in the FAR in Part 38, and they moved them to the GSAM. And GSA did a lot to streamline those ordering procedures. They made it much easier to do a single award BPA. They took away a lot of the independent evaluations that agencies were making. They're looking to make these a much more user-friendly experience. It also, though, by moving it out of the FAR and into the GSAM, it means GSA doesn't have to coordinate all of the changes in the future with the FAR Council. So it's going to have a little bit more independence to control the future of the schedules program.
That is
It'll
interesting.
still work with OMB, but that's it. So it's not like GSA is going to be off on their own, charting their own course, but it's a big deal. And reading FAR, the GSAM 538 now is I highly recommend it to anyone who's working in the schedule space.
I'm speaking with Emily Murphy. She's former GSA administrator and now senior fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting. Well, Emily, you also mentioned Part 12. Tell us about what you were seeing there.
So Part 12, again, we saw a huge emphasis on commercial acquisition, that we really want to simplify and streamline and promote using commercial solutions. We went even further, though, this time around, and we said that we're going to be doing. There's always been a $7.5 million threshold for commercial solutions that were for commercial items. This went further, and actually, if you watch the video that was included in the practitioners album with Part 12, you'll see some of the contracting people from DHS's PIL, and they're so excited because they're talking about the $7.5 million threshold and what it means, and how this is going to really streamline and push forward that simplification. So we got rid of a third of the clauses that previously came along with Part 12. That's a substantial reduction in what contracting officers are going to be able to administer and what contractors are going to have to accept in order to do business with the government. But the ability to use these simplified acquisition procedures up to $7.5 million, when in the past they've generally stopped being used at about $250,000, is an incredible game changer in terms of where we're going to have contracting officers spending their time and energy and what we're going to be demanding of our contractors. I have to think it's a little bit tied also to the attempts for one gov strategies where we're trying to bring OEMs in. And if we can make this a simpler process, perhaps more OEMs will want to be prime contractors with the government.
Speaking about that simplified procurement limit of $7.5 million, it looks like they've also brought construction into that category.
And I haven't had a chance to speak with anyone in the construction space about it, but in the past, it's always been a challenge because if you talk to the construction industry, they'll tell you that every project is individual, separate. It's very hard to commercialize them and make them a standard offering. Additionally, you've got things like the Brooks Act and others that have applied in construction and still continue to apply. So it's going to be interesting to see how that's carried out and what that means for those. I hate to call anything that's $7 million or $7.5 million a small purchase, but for these smaller purchases. Because when you think about new construction, that's still a new courthouse will cost you several $100 million on up.
With the simplification of Part 12, how should contracting officers balance, I guess, this new openness to innovation, but also the old sort of fairness and equality and consideration of the bids?
So I think it makes it even more important that contracting officers go back to an earlier release in the FAR when we talked about sources sought and how to do market research. And there was a real emphasis at that point in time from the FAR Council on educating themselves, making sure that they're having conversations, using RFIs, but not only RFIs, using industry days, using conversations, structured conversations with offers. So making sure that they know what's out there. And it is also going to become a question of making sure that it's clear what's available through, again, when you take Part 8 and 12 together, what's available through those BICs and what is the art of the possible. And we haven't even talked about things like OTAs, which are also promoted. You're using CSOs. It becomes much more attractive at this point. The one that isn't mentioned in any of these sections, though, is the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And I'm a little concerned because SBIRs in the past have always had that ability to be a preferred sole source once they hit Part 3 because competition was considered to have been resolved by Parts 1 and 2 and to be commercialized at that point in time. But if a commercialized SBIR isn't on a BIC, does it have all the advantages of being a SBIR or does the advantage go away? So that's one of the questions that I think is going to have to be explored going forward.
And what else are you watching as the packages continue to roll out?
So the speed at which they're coming out. So we saw just we saw several new parts released on the 14th, and we saw another drop on the 21st. We had the new language come out about bid protests. We've got some new language on contractor responsibility. So it's going to be interesting to see how these all fit together. And we're still waiting to see what Part 19 and Part 15 look like. And those are two that I'm watching for pretty closely to see what changes are there, what changes and what stays the same.
It's a little bit like reading a mystery book chapter out of order. You don't quite know how to put all the pieces together yet.
I always think of it as a jigsaw puzzle where we're getting just, 4 or 5 pieces at a time and trying to figure out what the picture is going to be at the end.
Well,
but it's exactly that mystery.
Still lots to look forward to. Emily Murphy is a former GSA administrator and now senior fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting. Emily, thanks for your insights as always.
Thank you, Terry. Great being with you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former senior advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization. Really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third-generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down, and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career, I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected. Say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy. It's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally, or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it. Share the credit. Perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him and as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has pearls of wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.